right. Go ahead.
Good morning, everybody. It is September 16, and the slaughterhouse of failure is not in our destiny. We shall persevere until we succeed. Of Mandino modified. So today's the second part of what we started last week about cold calling. And this is obviously a big subject. So Dan, if you'd like to start with that, and then we'll go from there.
Yeah, so last week we spoke about, that cold calling mindset, how to kind of set your mind up for, the ups and downs of cold calling, and, it's a numbers game and how you kind of deal with that. And then this week we're going to dig a little bit deeper into how to increase those numbers of positive cold calls and having a positive outcome from those cold calls. So this week we're going to be talking about the technique. It's one of the most important skills you can develop as a sales rep. Cold calling is very difficult. It's an art in and of itself, but ultimately it really comes down to just being yourself and getting to the meat of the sales conversation faster. So how do you do that? By focusing on the bare elements of a good prospecting conversation, right? That's going to help you stay focused. And then the prospect doesn't get irritated and impatient with you because you're actually bringing something of value. You need to look at it from a different perspective. You need to think about it in terms of, you really only want to be calling on your prospects. And you might think to yourself, yeah, that absolutely makes sense. You don't need to tell me that. But what is a prospect? You have to know what your ideal prospect is first. And we talked about that a little bit last week, but in essence, a prospect is someone who wants to solve their problem. If they don't want to solve their problem, if they don't even know what their problem is, you're not going to help them solve it because they don't care. They're not putting enough thought, time, or energy into that problem because they don't think they have the problem, or they just don't even want to solve it. So if they don't already want to solve it, you're wasting your time by trying to convince them. We shouldn't be trying to convince anybody. We should make sure that we're calling on the right people. Call on the people that have a problem, and then we need to know what the problem is that they have that we can solve. So there's three things that you can think about when you're calling on people, and make this part of your daily cold calling routine. What is the problem that we solve? Why I believe this prospect has this problem, and then why I believe this prospect wants to solve the problem. And a lot of those you can get through having an intelligent conversation with that prospect, especially when you don't make it all about yourself or all about selling something, right? You make it about solving a problem. And because you're solving a problem, you need to ask questions to know what that problem is and how you're going to solve it and why they want to solve it. People buy things because they want a problem to be solved. They're willing to let problems continue to exist if they don't have the time, energy, or motivation to solve them. So look for the people that have a problem, that know they have a problem. They know what that problem is, how they can solve it. And then all you need to do is introduce to them your solution for that problem.
And you said the most important thing, bring something of value. Bring them something of value. Just by the way. So very often the people that are on the treadmill on whatever business they're in are so focused on their business that they don't even realize what's going on around them. And sometimes they can't see the wood for the trees because they're in the forest, but they're right in front of something, and they just see what they see, and they don't really have a good overview of things. So I want to just say that without sounding presumptuous, in some way, we can be a doctor for the doctor. So we can see what's going well. And the idea, as you've just said, what are the problems the practice has or the business has, which we can identify and bring to light. Excuse me. In order to do this, I think we need absolutely imperative, it is imperative, that we stay up to date with what's going on in the world around us. Because generally the healthcare provider is, just so busy looking at the patient or the accounts or whatever. So we're in a strange situation right now. I'm just trying to say, when you bring something of value, where are we at the moment? Where technical advances, scientific advances are going at lightning pace right now. Recession is in place, begun. Inflation at the same time. How's that possible? Misinformation is massive. Finding suitable, reliable labor is a problem. People no longer want to work. They don't want to commute. They don't want to stay in the office. So when we can detect a problem or a weak area, we can innocently ask the person we're talking to, the person we're talking to, about that particular weakness without saying we've noticed this problem or that. Just, by the way, how is the labor situation going when you know that they're short-staffed? And that'll create an emotion they'll spill out and say, oh my gosh, I've got this problem and that problem. I'm trying to find people. So that's one of the ways where we can actually bring something to the party, is when we ask the right questions, which can inspire an emotional response. And in order to do that, we just have to be a little bit up to date with what's going on, and be able to inspire an emotional reply, which will give us the answers so we can give them the answers.
Absolutely. And you really don't want to prospect to make a sale. You want to prospect to start a conversation. And then it becomes a game of, what questions am I going to ask to identify that they have a problem? How can I solve their problem? Stop selling when you're prospecting. Shift your focus from how can I sell to this person to how can I help this person, right? And solving that problem for them. Because when you start to help, your demeanor changes. When you're coming at it from a position of helping, or from the mindset of helping them, your demeanor changes. Your tonality shifts. You're curious instead of assumptive. You're assuming that they have a problem. You don't know that they have a problem. Once again, it comes back to them giving you what we need, not us giving, or us giving them what they need, not what we think that they need, right? So let curiosity drive the conversation. The cold call is really an opportunity to learn more about this prospect, to see if you can help them, not to see if you can sell them something. So once you've identified your ideal prospect, by being able to solve their problem, identifying that they have a problem, it then becomes a game of, it's a numbers game. So you need to find the gap. You need to get the prospect to tell you that they want to solve this problem that they have. The best salespeople look at this as a disqualifying game. And by that, I mean, how quickly can I get this person out of this step of my pipeline? They either have a problem that I can solve, or they don't have a problem that I solve. They can even identify a problem, or you can help them identify a problem that they have, and you can help solve it. Or they're either not a prospect or the right person in general, and they're out, or they are, and I move them forward because I can help them. Does that make sense? So you're building a rapport, you're finding out what their problem is, you're seeing if you can solve that problem, you're helping them rather than selling to them. But make sure you identify as soon as possible whether or not you should keep working with this prospect. And if you can't help them, if they don't have a problem, if they don't see that they have a problem, then they're not a prospect. Move on and don't waste your time with that person. Start by telling them in a clear language which problem you've noticed that they have, or through your conversation, which problem they've told you that they've had. And then help them realize how that problem can be solved, or what you can do to help them solve that problem.
Yeah. I think also at the very beginning, when we are talking to somebody, we should excuse me, try and identify ourselves as somebody that, hello, my name is so, excuse me, and I help practices maximize their efficiencies and patient-staff relationships. For example, would you allow me a couple of minutes to ask you a few questions about your business? So it's kind of like opening to say, I care about you. I'm interested in your business, but I'm also an expert in the field and I might be able to help you. And you give your name first so that it's not like, you're bringing down any potential barriers. And I think if we're genuinely trying to solve a problem for anybody and we ask the right questions, we'll get the people who we're talking to tell us the problem. And as Dan just said, some of them may say, no, I'm fine, I'm just doing great. And you say, well, that's perfectly good. Thank you. Good luck. Bye-bye. And other people will say, no, I'm okay. And you say, okay, good. Well, it doesn't sound like you're very happy with it. Are you really, really okay? Or is it, or is there some way that we might be able to talk and we can help you? And, always I talk about we, not I, because we has connotations of a team that can help rather than I'm here to help you. So it's just about trying to make the prospect feel comfortable with whom he or she is speaking.
Yeah, and when you're doing that, when you're cold calling, you want to do something when you're initially reaching out to them that's going to differentiate you from everybody else. So don't be creative with your opener. Don't use, the normal, hi, how are you? How are you doing today? How's your day been so far? Come up with something a little bit more, a little bit different, something that's going to differentiate you. So something like, hi, my name's Dan Burke, or hi, Lawrence, my name's Dan Burke. I'm with Pharmanex. I'm calling to introduce myself and see if what we do might be useful to you right now or in the future. How's your timing? Do you have a little bit of time to speak today? Right? Something a little bit different. And that's going to help differentiate you. And that's going to be something that they're not used to hearing. So they're not automatically just going to, see right away that you don't have something of value. So you need to also create the right cold calling script, right? So don't be afraid when you're initially starting the cold call to have a script and kind of read from it, make it sound organically sounding. But a cold calling script is one of the best ways to take the guesswork out of what to say when you get your prospects on the line. That way you're not stuttering around, you're not having small talk with them, you're not adding useless filler or trying to figure out what works and what doesn't. And then you need to practice. You're never going to get good at cold calling without understanding what you need to improve. And that takes active practice. And then you need to document your calls. Make sure you're documenting your calls, taking good notes on the prospect so you can go back and look at it, especially if you have a second or a third call with them. They're going to be super impressed if you bring up things that you talked about for the first call or something personal that they told you about their dog or whatever it may be. I utilize those notes on a daily basis, right? So document as soon as you get off that call so it's fresh. I actually keep my close CRM open while I'm on calls. I go to that person's contact information and there's a place in there where you can actually document your calls. And so I do that for every single prospect so that when I come back to them, or if I go back to them after a year, I have a good opener to start with, right? Hey, how's your dog doing? I talked to you about a year ago, something like that. And it's gonna impress them and it's gonna differentiate you from everybody else. So, and then ultimately, the last thing you're gonna do is follow up, right? You're gonna outline the next steps, if there are any, in your notes through your documentation. Outline next steps with the call before you get off, a call to action or whatever it may be. And then, this is a game. You're gonna hear a lot of no's. You're gonna hear a lot more no's than you hear yeses. So the number one thing that you need to do is not take it personally. It's a tough job. You're going to get those lots of no's, and how successful you're going to be at cold calling is going to be determined by how you respond to those no's. Do you take it personally? Do you get depressed because you've heard 10 no's today? Each and every one of us gets calls every single day from these telemarketers. And the first thing they hear from me 99% of the time is no. And they just say, okay, great, thanks so much. And they hang up. And guess what they're doing the second they hang that up? They're dialing the next number. So you have to have that mentality.
Yeah, I think it's essential that we understand that sales is basically relationship. I've bought a vehicle from one dealer, and I didn't particularly like the vehicle, but I liked the guy who was selling it. And I bought a second car from the same dealer, but that same guy, not the dealer. So, because he seemed to care. The vehicle wasn't even that good. I mean, I didn't like, it was a car that I didn't particularly like, but he was so caring, and he was so interested in how I was doing and how everything was going. We became kind of friends. And I think it's important that the relation, that the person we're talking to feels that the person that we care, feels that we care, basically. So we're not just, and also the tone of our voice, it's not the mechanical thing, because we've made 17 calls today and we've had, 18 no's, or 17 no's. So we're not, hello, my name, and we become mechanical. It's got to be as if it's the first call we're making, and if it's the only call that we've got on our list to call. So we're going to be enthusiastic about it, the tone of the voice and how we feel, and asking questions as if it's, we know they have a problem, but we've got to ask the question for them to tell us in a way which brings the emotion, but we've also got to ask the question in a caring way. It's all about, in my opinion, a relationship with the person that we're talking to, even if it's the first time we've ever spoken to them. Just feel like you care.
And if you're not in that right frame of mind, like we talked about last week, take a break. If you've been making cold calls for an hour and you're starting to lose your mojo, take a break, go walk around the neighborhood, come back refreshed and excited again. Talk yourself up, that affirmation, visualization while you're on your walk, whatever it may be. But ultimately, we need to have these prospects validate that they have a problem. You need to have them tell you that they want to solve this problem. They have to say it or it's worthless. So you're in your questioning of your prospect and in getting them to tell you that they have a problem, you need to ask questions in a way that they admit that they have a problem. Otherwise, it's worthless. Not saying that they have a problem is a strong signal that they aren't committed to finding a solution. And one of the ways that you can do that is through question stacking. And question stacking is just a way of adding questions together to get your point across, but also getting an answer from them that you can utilize to move on to the next steps. So figure out what you need from the prospect. What requirement needs to be met in order to have a quality sales conversation? Many sales teams don't do this properly. They ask one question and that's it, but you need to validate their problem and then also ask a question about how you can solve it. So you may want to say something along the lines of, how many of your patients have nutritional deficiencies? What are you doing to solve that problem? Something along those lines. Or we know that, most patients that you're seeing in a day have nutritional deficiencies. Have you found a solution that works where you can actually test and measure that they have a deficiency and then be able to validate it moving forward? Something along those lines, right? But you also want to be formulating those questions so that the answers that you're going to get, right? You want this to be a controlled conversation. And then ultimately you need to close. Has the prospect told you that solving the problem or that solving the problem you solve is a priority? If they do, go for the meeting. New salespeople, a lot of times, either new to the game or new to the company, they validate that gap, but they want to keep selling the prospect on why their solution's great. I just had this problem a month ago. We were presenting to a doctor in Missouri, and I don't want to say it's a problem. He was excited. He was getting in too deep into the weeds. The doctor already saw what we had, put his hand on the scanner. He was excited. He was telling us how this could be useful for his practice and for his patients. And Greg kept selling. And I'm standing on the other side of him telling him to cut it off. Like, stop selling, stop selling. You validated the problem. They've already told you it's a priority, that they've thought about, have been looking for a solution, and this will be the solution. Okay, so stop selling. They're sold. You're done. At that point, it's just, how can we move forward? So you don't want to sell past the close. That's what a lot of people do. Once you get that close, you stop selling. You stop helping. You stop solving their problem. You're done. So don't worry about it after you've sold them and they've bought in. Stop. Don't sell past the close.
What you just said, Dan, is so true. When we get excited and we've got so much to tell them, we keep on going. And in fact, this thing about, we should actually be experts in understanding that too, because we are sold to every day. Somebody's trying to sell us something every day. And some people are good salespeople and some people are not. But we should learn from how people are selling to us, what makes us feel like this is something that's good or not, or something that we need, or something that or that the person's going on too long, or that he doesn't or she doesn't know what they do, what he or she are doing. So I think we should also understand and observe when we are sold to, learn from that too. Learn from that. How was this person selling to me? Was that person, really interested in my sale or in the sale, or interested in me? And so I think you're right. This thing about cut it off when you oversell. It's so true.
Yeah, I learned. So yesterday I was on a call with a credit card company, trying to figure out something that I had going on my credit card, and they were transferring me from department to department. And the one department transferred me to the other. They thought that there was like 2 minutes of silence when they first transferred me, and I was saying hello, and the rep said, "Oh, I'm sorry, I thought they were going to do a warm transfer." And I'm like, okay, a warm transfer must be when they say, "Hi, I have Dan Burke on the line. He's calling about this, blah, 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 blah." So that's something that we can utilize in our three-way validation calls. Do a warm transfer, right? Don't just say, "Hey, this is Lawrence Cazan Cassini." Talk about him, build him up, talk about how long he's been in the business, do a nice warm transfer. So before we wrap it up, I just want to talk a little bit about when the best time is to make these cold calls. So if you're doing the social selling thing, that there's the best times to post where you're going to get the most engagement. Just as that holds true for social selling and on social media, the same thing holds true for cold calling. So Wednesdays between 4 and 5 p.m. are generally considered the best performing time for cold calls. Why is that? It's in the middle of the week. It's hump day. You want to avoid calls on Mondays and Fridays. People are they're returning from the weekend, right? They're less interested in a sales pitch, or Fridays when they're preparing for the weekend. So think about, those times. Tuesdays, Wednesdays, Thursdays are the best, usually towards the end of the day as people are winding down from their days, 4 to 5 o'clock. And lunch times are good as well. Lawrence, do you have anything else to add?
No, not for the moment. Thank you. I think that's wise. Maybe if anybody's got anything they want to add or any questions they have.
Well, you guys have touched on so much, my little fingers are worn out. But it's interesting because, Dan, when you talk about, well, there's really important times for cold calling. I think a lot of us, I mean, I'd be foolish enough, maybe not to go on Monday morning, but to go on Monday afternoon out calling on people. But if you know these are the opportune times, then you just do the block scheduling for yourself. And that way you're not overwhelmed with, oh, I've got to do this so much. You just block schedule the most opportune times to do it. And you just make sure you get out there and do it at those times.
You want to be doing and saying everything that you can to increase your odds, right? And if you're making calls first, if you're trying to make cold calls first thing on Monday morning or 5 o'clock on a Friday, you're severely decreasing your odds. So you're wasting your time.
Yeah.
Spend time doing it when you're going to get the optimal result.
Put yourself in the person's shoes. By Friday, it's the end of the week. They've seen 30 people a day, and lunchtime they're already making plans to try and leave early if they can, because they're exhausted and they don't want to hear anybody. So you're right, absolutely. In the middle of the week, they may have a little opening in their thinking.
Perfect.
All right.
All right. Any other questions, comments?
Well, thanks everybody.
All right, everybody.
Yeah.
One last comment I wanted to make, Dan. I really enjoyed when you said a lot of people don't like to do cold calling sometimes, but I like when you said as soon as you find out a problem you can solve for that person, they become your prospect. That was brilliant, because everybody, not everybody's a cold market, right? And people don't want to do it, and you're gonna have to increase your numbers because you don't have that personal relationship with them yet. But as soon as you find that connection, that you can solve a problem they have, you've established that human connection, and then maybe you can open up yourself and be a little bit vulnerable about how maybe you have the same problem. Now you have a connection, and now you have something to work off of, and that cold call has just become a prospect that is warming up towards a solution you provide. Thank you so much for doing this, guys. I appreciate you.
Thanks, Joe. Happy to do it. All right. Well, it's 10 o'clock. It's Friday. We don't want to take up any more of your time. We need to start planning for next week. We've got LumiSpa IO in pre-launch. So we should be thinking about that. But more importantly, October 6th to the 8th in Utah, Provo is our next meeting. So start thinking about prospecting out west to see if you can get some folks out there. I know it's it's two weeks away. And if you haven't yet, make plans to get yourself there as well, especially if you haven't been there. So thanks, everybody. Have a great weekend, and we'll see you next week.
Hasta luego.
Bye.
Thanks, Lawrence. Thanks, Dan.
Hey, great call, everybody. Have a great weekend.
Thanks, great call.
Thank you.
Thanks, guys.
Thanks very much, gentlemen.
Good seeing you.